Welcome to the Indian Gaming Association's The New Normal webcast. My name is Lisa Johnson, and I'm the conference manager for the Indian Gaming Trade Show and Convention. I'd like to share a few housekeeping tips before we get started. Everyone is muted by default except for our speakers. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the question or chat box and they'll be brought up at the end. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Victor Rocha, Conference Chairman of the Indian Gaming Association.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Victor Rocha. My co-host is Jason Giles, and this is The New Normal. In today's conversation, we're talking to Chairman Ernest Stevens of the Indian Gaming Association, President Fawn of the National Congress of American Indians, and our good friend Larry Wright Jr., the Executive Director of the National Congress of American Indians, about the recent reactivation of the National Congress of American Indians Indian Gaming Association Task Force on Tribal Sovereignty. Welcome, everyone. As you can see, Fawn is still coming in. She's a second late, and Chairman Stevens is going to be coming a little later. He has, I believe he said somebody passed away and he had to go to a ceremony. And if you know Chairman Stevens, he's really good about appearing in these. Hey, there she is. Look at that. Holy cow. She's on vacation. So Fonzie, so Chairman Stevens will be here a little later. Let's just jump in. So what, Jason, why don't you start?
Yeah,
I know you're more involved than I am, but really, what is this reactivated NCAI-IGA task force? What is it and why now?
Yeah, thanks, Victor, and thanks for everyone joining us today. This is a really important topic, and it's not going to be strictly a gambling topic as usual. It's about Indian country, really. And last week we had a great time at NCAI's mid-year at Shakopee, up there in beautiful Shakopee, Minnesota. Great facility, and just a really good layout now with their expansion. And we held the first meeting of the IGA NCAI task force. And I'll just be brief. What is it? How did it start? It's been around since the early 90s. I think back when Rick Hill activated the first one way back when. I can't even remember who was NCAI president and executive director. It was probably may have been Tex Hall's first time. But, there are times when we really do need to come together with NCAI because we're experts in gambling. That's our business, protecting Indian gaming, protecting economic development and everything that Indian gaming has done for the tribes. But NCAI has those hardcore socioeconomic issues that really do impact everyone on the reservation and all tribal citizens on a day-to-day basis. Healthcare, fire, police, environmental protections, all those types of issues are dealt with by tribal leaders in a consensus way, we hope, at NCAI. And that's what NCAI is, 1944, largest and oldest tribal organization representing Indian country, tribes across the country. So anytime the task force sort of stands down, that's why we say we're reactivating it. When I first came on here in 2006, the first time they reactivated it when I was working here, I was just the legislative director, was the McCain-Pombo. They were trying to amend IGRA and do some other things. The NIGC was all over tribes back then, wanting to charge higher fee rates and intrude upon Class 2 sovereignty, which IGRA clearly says is a tribal jurisdiction, and they were wanting to change that whole ball of wax and change the law under IGRA. That was the first time we did that, and what a success it was. Everyone came together, we pooled resources, and we pushed back on Chairman Pombo in the House and then Senator McCain in the Senate. And since then, we've reacted at a couple other times with regards to labor laws. They were trying to make it easier for unions to organize on tribal jurisdiction. If anyone remembers that, we beat that back. So a lot of times it might seem like, hey, what did that task force do? Well, something so bad and so urgent was coming down the pike, we had to throw up roadblocks in it. And we had to be prepared for if something did really, if unions could come on tribal jurisdiction and ignore all tribal laws, and you got the NLRB saying they have jurisdiction on tribal gaming properties primarily because they were the big money maker, but you can think of anywhere on a tribe that is ripe for unionization. If you've got mines on your tribe, on your tribal lands, those miners are, they're usually part of a union. And it's not that tribes are anti-union. Plenty of tribes had laws dealing with labor laws, and they just wanted those companies to follow. Hey, you come into Indian country, you better follow our tribal jurisdiction. It's no different if they went into any other state, they would comply with those state laws. So that's kind of a quick and dirty of the task force. And we were going to reactivate it right before COVID with regards to sports betting and a couple other issues, only in gaming, but COVID hit, everything slowed down. And here we back are dealing with, unfortunately, something that's even more grave than threats to tribal gaming, threats to unionization on tribal lands. We've got a Supreme Court that's really so far has not been good for tribes. They gave us a nice win, and then they take it away in Castro Huerta less than 2 years later. I mean, that's pretty unprecedented. When they did Plessy versus Ferguson, it took them, 60, 70 years to undo their egregious mistake. For Indian country, 2 years later, they're overturning their own decision just because the Oklahoma governor cried around and cried around and cried around, and is still crying around. And that's just wrong. And that's when, you talk about legitimacy of the Supreme Court. Well, Indian country's always had an issue with the Supreme Court and orders not being followed or decisions going against us, particularly with regard to tribal sovereignty. So at NCAI, again, I can't thank Executive Director Wright and President Sharp enough for giving us that forum, because we found even more issues that are grave and concerning, particularly with regards to the environment. And unfortunately, some of this is coming from the Biden administration, and they're just not consulting with tribes again. And of course, we have the IGA decision we expect any day now, and the pending Maverick case in the Northwest, which is the same argument as IGA, that it's an unconstitutional race-based statute and it needs to be thrown out. If the Supreme Court buys that argument, a lot of federal Indian laws are going to be under scrutiny, and we just can't have it, and we've got to be prepared. So that's kind of why we reactivated this task force, was one, to deal with the Supreme Court potential decisions, and two, to start holding government agencies accountable again. And finally, lastly, we're going to take an executive order to President Biden and say, you've been pushing out these executive orders. You get a bad decision on abortion, executive order to do what they can. He's pushing out a lot of executive orders on a lot of issues. Well, I think he'd be pretty interested to do one for Indian country and say that his administration, is going to listen to the treaties and follow the treaties, and that they're going to uphold federal Indian law, 200 plus years of federal Indian law under this government, and support us. And, that would be something great President Biden could do and then run on if he wants to stay competitive in Michigan and Wisconsin, Arizona. That's the essence of this task force. We want these issues addressed, and we're not going to stop until one of these administrations starts to pick up the ball again on this. So with that, I can let's President Sharp, if you're still there, we would like to kick it off with you as a senior member here, and then we'll wait for Chairman Stevens. But what were your impressions, President Sharp, from NCAI last week?
Yes. Well, first of all, mahalo. Thank you, everyone.
Oh, great. Mahalo.
Yes, I'm here in Maui. Those people that know me know a big passion of mine is our traditional ancestral highways out on the open Pacific Ocean. And at Quinault, I'm a member of our Canoe Society, and I'm going to be launching here in the next hour after our podcast out into the waters here off of Maui and outrigger canoes. So I'm going to be spending my day canoeing, and I just arrived late, and I was so happy to get this invitation, even though I'm on vacation and going to be doing what I do best out on the waters. I couldn't miss this. I didn't want to miss this. And
Thank
so
you.
thank you so much for the invitation. And yeah, my impression last week, there was we had standing room only. It was a packed room at NCAI, and there's just a great deal of energy. And during my opening remarks the first morning, I wanted to kind of point, to left field there to say, look, we're going to be expecting a decision out of the United States Supreme Court. We want all of Indian country and our friends and allies to know that the moment that decision is published, we're going to be taking action, decisive action, aggressive action. And we need the partnership that we have with IGA. And as you point out, it's been successful so many times in the past. It's going to be necessary for us to come together because we can't anticipate the outcome, but we do know that one thing's for certain: any attack on tribal sovereignty or undermining our jurisdiction, we're going to rally all of Indian country together. We're going to be aggressive. We're going to have a strong message. We have a number of briefing documents that our board has seen. We've gone through several scenarios on potential outcomes. We're fully expecting a split decision. It's going to take our attorneys all across Indian country a couple of days to evaluate and analyze the case. But once they do that, we're going to convene a webinar to bring all of our voices together and in our messaging. We also have legislative proposals that we're considering to run through Congress. We've already met with a number of our friends and allies on Capitol Hill. We know that a number of the different outcomes that relate directly to tribal sovereignty and jurisdiction, for us, that's something that's non-negotiable. You may have heard some of our board members talk about tribal sovereignty and jurisdiction. That's an inherent attribute of who we are as tribal nations. And the idea or thought that we don't have jurisdiction over our children, over our future, that's simply not going to stand in Indian country. And we're going to rally with IGA in this task force and partnership. And so we laid out that perspective in our breakout session. But then we also heard from tribal leaders on all the other issues that are confronting Indian country, for which we need a very clear vision, a very clear strategy, and then certainly concrete actionable things. And at NCAI, we want to create multiple points of entry for any and every tribal nation that wants to join with us in the pushback on ICWA, on concrete actionable steps, things that you could do, letters you can write, messaging you could do, and if you're interviewed by your local media and press, so that we can stay on the same page and very strong in our messaging. So we are very happy with the first inaugural meeting since reactivating this task force. We had some youth that were at NCAI that have, they were children the last time this task force met, but they were well aware of the impact and have been drawn into tribal leadership. We also had elders. It's always impressive to see our crew, John Echohawk and others, who could relay stories and old battles that we've gone through to really point to the success that when we can galvanize Indian country, when we can unify, when we can amplify and unleash the voice of all of Indian country, we truly are an unstoppable force. And so we're very happy and delighted to join, and I just can't wait to see how all of this plays out, because we're ready. And when that decision comes down, we're going to continue to do the work and continue that legacy of success that leaders that have gone before us have carried on, and ensure that future generations are protected. So thank you. Siakwe.
Thank you, Fawn. I had no idea you were out in Maui this week, and we really appreciate you. What are you, 6 hours behind? So it's like 8 in the morning there.
And by the way, she didn't even say she was on vacation. She said, yes, I'll do it. So that was just like, wow, so thank you,
Yeah.
And Larry, as, tribal leader, now executive director at NCAI, if you can you, your tribe has dealt with on the ground issues, whether it was, obstruction from the state of Nebraska, all the way through to your congressional delegation at times. How do you see this task force galvanizing and reaching out to these individual member tribes, as Fawn just said, that we need all tribes on this one, and we're going to be pushing out paper from this task force and urging tribes to take model letters and just flood Congress and flood this administration with we are not happy, and we are actually very concerned, if not outright ready to lay down in the streets to stop this erosion of tribal sovereignty. Oh, you're on mute, Larry. You're on mute, Larry.
Got it.
There you
Got it.
go.
No, I appreciate the time and the invite to be part of this and really echo all the sentiments that have already been shared. You know, I kind of look at my tribe as kind of a microcosm of all of this, and the fact that you know, we were forcibly removed from our homeland, and then upon our return in the 60s, we were terminated, dealt with being a state tribe for a very short time, but still went through that process, got federally recognized again, and then you know, just fighting for our own sovereignty and the different issues. And so as we came back and we're nation building, and then one of those items that were afforded to us, the opportunity to game ourselves and have to go through that whole process, even though as clear as it is, you know, we had two states fighting us and an administration. And so for 16 years, we fought that fight. And you know, I think the importance of this task force really goes to show what it can do. And my tribe, being a member of NCAI throughout that whole time, and IGA, even though we didn't have a casino, but we knew that that's where the information was and the help could be. But to have a task force like this that really dovetails both sides of these issues and really kind of encapsulates all of Indian country and what we face, and especially the potential with the Brackeen decision and how important that was, not only to my tribe, but all tribes in the country. And so to have this task force come back is long overdue, but still timely in its reconvening. And having that happen at our NCAI mid-year conference was an honor to be part of. To be part of that meeting and hear the words from across Indian country just shows the importance of this task force. But you know, even greater, the work that IGA does day in and day out, and the work that NCAI does, and that it's still important. And when we looked at the amicus briefs that were filed on behalf of the Supreme Court case, we hadn't seen anything like that really unify Indian country before, or having over 500 submissions for that really shows that Indian country is paying attention, and we can be unified on the important issues like this, and what this may happen if it doesn't go how we want. But as President Sharp said, the conversations have been happening since it's been heard, the case has been heard, and preparing for every scenario that we can. And we're going to be prepared to fight one way or the other. We're still going to have to fight. It's just what's the tone of that fight, and the significance of the case, and what Indian country is going to do to galvanize behind this and continue to be unified and defend our sovereignty to the bitter end.
Right. And you know, Victor, I'll just get into some specifics now, but from IGA's standpoint, and hopefully Chairman can log in here. He's having trouble logging in, he said. But we've got two.
You
issues.
mean Ricky's having trouble logging in?
Yeah, yeah, his assistant is. But gambling wise, for those on the call, we know what the two big challenges are right now. One is tribal state compacting. It's kind of taken a, you know, we thought that we were moving forward on that. The playing field had leveled somewhat. You know, the laws weren't there, but tribes have done such a good job within their state in terms of focusing their lobbying now on state capitals. And then we've gotten, you know, let's just be honest, a lot of favorable governors have come our way, whether it's Jay Inslee or in New Mexico, Grisham, or was it? Yeah, Lujan Grisham, and all around. I mean, we still have the problem. And even in Oklahoma, they were having issues with the previous governor, but she kind of relented on some stuff and came to the negotiating table with regards to ball and dice games. And but you know, we get a new guy in there who's, you know, I guess a member of the Cherokee Nation, a tribal citizen. I somewhere he missed the classes on what sovereignty is, but and what it means to be a tribal citizen. But gambling wise, California kind of set us into a new direction with that last ballot proposition, combined with what's going on in the Maverick case in Washington State, trying to claim IGRA is unconstitutional based on race, and it gives tribes an unfair economic advantage, and all those arguments we thought we were done with in the 70s and 80s. And so what do we see now? And even the fights we had in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s with commercial gaming are right there back at the surface, because we have the Department of Interior basically just, wanting to streamline land into trust decisions, and also tweak some tribal state gaming compact regulations. All good things that tribes are overwhelmingly in support of. And the commercial gaming side is flooding their office with negative comments and stuff taken right out of the 1980s. Oh, tribes are just going to buy land in the middle of a city, get it into trust, and open a casino. I mean, that's where they're arguing. And these are major corporations, whether it's FanDuel, DraftKings. I mean, Victor, that coalition under the IFRA law firm that is doing this. And
so, and what Jason's talking about recently, there's an organization out there, which is, in fair disclosure, when they first started, they're a New Jersey trade group that was going to be putting out and reinforcing sports betting and online gaming. And my company, Victor Strategies, actually did some research for them and stuff like that. But when I saw recently that they submitted a 52-page commentary on land in a trust from this trade group that has nothing to do with tribal sovereignty whatsoever, but then you look and you see it's FanDuel and DraftKings. And what's sad is that, there's other organizations, tribes that don't, companies in there like Sightline or Canby that are part of this organization that have no idea that this trade group, from what my research is telling me, that they unilaterally put these submissions in without consulting with their members, just so they're carrying the water for FanDuel and DraftKings. And that's where the threat is these online gaming, because, we kicked their ass in California. And so now their strategy is, go after the tribes. Their trade group is called the Sports Betting Alliance, which is led by an attorney, lobbyist. I can't remember his name right now. He's a kind of ugly, trollish kind of guy, but that's neither here nor there. I saw him under a bridge once. So, but Jeremy Cooden, that's his name.
Okay.
That's his name. So that's where the threat now. You got the sports guys, you see them in Florida. That was a big deal for them. They got their butt kicked in Florida, and their strategies to go on the attack, go against sovereignty, their lobbyists and they're doing business in Indian country.
And that's the biggest thing. And Victor, the thing we can't, and guess what? They've been, I'll be honest too, they've been supporters and sponsors at our trade show. And we've sat and met with some of these companies. So now to start spewing that kind of what we can only consider bile, because it's arguments that were done in past and used to denigrate tribes and denigrate tribal leaders, they're back at it. I know the tribes in the Northwest, Washington Indian Gaming Association, they're ready to, take them on again. If this Maverick case Maverick case was thrown out of district court. Of course, they appealed right to the Ninth Circuit. So we'll see what the Ninth Circuit has to say, but we've got to keep in mind their whole strategy was to get this to the Supreme Court as quickly as possible. I mean, they knew, and they know it's kind of a ludicrous
right.
argument.
They have Ted Olson on retainer.
Mhm.
So, their strategy for the Supreme Court is very
Right.
obvious if you're paying attention.
And so we've got that threat looming, and we're not, I feel like, at least since I've been at IGA, we've grown closer and closer. Our interests have aligned more and more with commercial gaming, and they've been more receptive than ever, largely because they started doing business in Indian country and started seeing, hey, don't fight them. Let's just work with them and get a contract. And there's plenty of tribes out there, whether it's Harrah's is running a couple tribal casinos, but now you have FanDuel's and DraftKings and a couple others running sports books for tribes. and then turning around and saying there shouldn't be tribal sovereignty, there shouldn't be a land into trust process. They have no idea that that land into trust process is to right a historical wrong.
Oh, no, Jason,
that
they
land was
absolutely
stolen.
know though.
Yeah.
They absolutely
do?
know. They
I
do
mean,
know it. So
I don't
this
know if
is,
anyone like a Fawn or a Chairman Stevens has sat there and said, these lands were stolen. We can identify which, and that's just stolen treaty lands. If you want to take it a little further, that land that was promised, that was never given over, or land that was just outright, whether it was for a military base or a highway, hey, we're taking this, we need it, nothing you can do, we're taking it. So, that's what we're dealing with on the gambling side. And it's a tough issue. Fawn, if you're still there, if you want to bring up some of the environmental issues that unfortunately we're finding with whether it's Biden's own Department of Interior or EPA or Corps of Engineers, there's all kinds of issues going on with environmental causes where they're just not consulting with tribe. And some of it is good. I mean, some of it, we need new and more renewable energy across the country. Doesn't mean you're going to come in and desecrate our sacred sites in Nevada while you're looking for more lithium for these electric car batteries. You want to expound upon that, Fawn?
Yes, absolutely. And that was something that tribes in the state of Washington, when we advanced I-1631, it was a carbon pricing initiative. We wrote into that particular citizen initiative, as well as the subsequent Climate Commitment Act, the principle of free, prior, and informed consent. And it achieved it in both. Unfortunately, our governor vetoed that entire section when he signed the Climate Commitment Act, but we could tell, though it's on the horizon, an explosion of growth across the United States and an explosion of growth in Indian country with such a massive scale of investment. We knew and foretold that we were going to have to protect our interests so that no other government could take unilateral action affecting our land, territories, resources, or people without our explicit consent, and especially around sacred sites. And so the provision that we wrote into that bill, as well as that citizen initiative, was FPIC as it relates to sacred sites. And we're finding that even achieving something like that, our friends and allies that have been with us on the Democrat side and even on our side oppose that particular basic principle of political equity. I mean, it's unthinkable that for any other development they would tear down a church or desecrate a graveyard or cemetery. But we've come to know that it doesn't matter if it's dark money, if it's green money. If there is a treaty right or a tribal interest that stands in the way between a developer and the almighty dollar, they're going to roll us every time. And so we're finding that we have to come together to protect our land and resources. Fortunately, at NCAI, we've been able to elevate this issue internationally, and we've been to multiple venues, including the last two conference of parties, and we're invited to the table with John Kerry to bring other Indigenous leaders directly to meet with the United States, tribes from Africa, from Northern Siberia, from Northern Europe, South America, Central America. I mean, we have relatives who are risking their very life to protect and defend the Amazon. Every single day they're out there risking their life to do that important work. And so it's important for us to be able to ensure that the rights of Indigenous peoples are elevated outside of the United States, outside of basic public policy, because these principles are universal. They transcend national boundaries. And the entire world knows that Indigenous peoples are on the front lines of climate change. We're disproportionately impacted, and we have little to no resources. And there's a lot of talk, out of the administration about the epic investment in Indian country from the Inflation Reduction Act, $500 billion. But you take $500 billion and you divide it among 574 tribal nations, it's less than $1 million. And to deal with, climate change, it's nowhere near the scale of what we're going to need to repatriate our lands, to acquire lands, to protect our water resource, water as a sacred resource, our salmon, all of the natural habitat. And tribes know how to do this work. And so, yes, we absolutely have to come together to advance our position and our standing at a local level, at a regional level, at a national level, and certainly internationally, because the world is paying attention to what we're doing, and NCAI is right in the middle of all those conversations, and not only in the public policy area, but at NCAI, I relayed a video that we did at the World Economic Forum. The global business community is interested in investing global scale resources into Indian country. And so I've been invited to co-chair the planning for the World Economic Forum for Davos 2024. And so NCAI is going to continue those conversations. We're going to continue to elevate and amplify our voice. And so, yes, there's a great deal of work that needs to be done environmentally. And I've appreciated the partnership we've had with IGA over the years on the environment. And I just know that's another place where there's a very spiritual and sacred dimension to that work, as there is with all of these other issues. And that truly is the place where we can come together and ensure that we have a solid, not only defensive strategy, but an offensive strategy, and just simply stepping in to the spiritual strength that we've inherited. And I've often said, when it comes to the climate crisis, people might think that Indigenous peoples are weak and vulnerable because we are so deeply impacted. But I say to the contrary, we're strong, we're resilient. We carry centuries of traditional knowledge and wisdom within each and every generation. And so I thank you for raising that issue, because that's another major part of NCI's agenda. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, President Sharp. And Larry, domestically, we've still got issues with healthcare, tribal schools, BIE, all policing. Somebody just yesterday told me that one tribe has 2 active duty police officers to cover 2,300 square miles. I want to say it was Wind River or somebody up there in upper Midwest. And there's just simply not a lot of resources right now, especially, and then after COVID, tribes are experiencing the same thing that the rest of the nation is: lack of workers, lack of, especially in certain fields, whether it's nursing or policing. Those workers kind of went away. It's a hard thing to explain. The top economists, the Federal Reserve, they're having a hard time. Where did all these workers go? And we have such low unemployment in this country. It's tough. I have my own opinions. I think it's largely due to the previous administration's immigration policies. When you cut that off, it opens up other avenues for everyone else. Maybe they weren't really happy being a nurse and they want to go do something else, and that opportunity's there. So you get a reposturing of the workforce. But Larry, how is moving forward, NCAI taking policy positions and things of that nature? What can if you can explain to the folks why NCAI is well suited to take these and taking a resolution and a piece of legislation and distributing it across Congress, and the effectiveness there. I don't think a lot of tribes get that, and it's not anyone's fault, but because we live in DC and we work DC, but it is a powerful thing when a congressman from South Dakota sees, oh, well, all the tribes here are supporting this, so I better pay attention because they're his constituents. Mm-hmm. If you can expound that a little.
Yeah, I think, NCAI was founded on a consensus-based, being a consensus-based organization, and has grown that way over these 79 years, almost 80. And so when you have a resolution that goes through the process through NCAI from Indian country, and even other organizations that have issues that they want to take up, because of that consensus base, and in an effort to make sure that what we deal with is national in scope. Obviously, there's going to be localized issues that are kind of specialized, but as long as it doesn't pit one tribe against another, and that really brings out the strength in having that pass and be the direction that NCAI moves in, and to carry out the wishes of that resolution, whatever it might be. But when you have a region, as you mentioned, the Great Plains, and the tribes in the Great Plains are very strong in and of their own right. But when they come together and galvanize on an issue like that, that gets members of Congress' attention. And I think by extension, when we know that that resolution isn't just unique to the Great Plains, but it carries over into other regions too, because we can talk about those kind of issues on a national level, and really touch, Great Plains, Southwest, Southeast, wherever it might be, taking that 30,000 foot view and really looking at what's the impact on sovereignty here, or this issue, and even looking at what other issues could it impact that may not yet. But I think once you have that, it does carry a lot of weight, and we continue to have members of Congress and administration, instead of reaching out to the tribes directly, they come to NCAI and say, what does Indian country think? And I think that's the important piece as we talk about this task force again and bringing it back, knowing that this isn't just within the four walls of NCAI and what we do, but it's working with our other organizations, our national Native organizations, our regional intertribal organizations as well, to really make sure that when we talk about these resolutions and carrying them out, that it's reflective of everyone, and that does get the attention of Congress and the administration, and really, kind of NCAI kind of serves as that megaphone that we want to listen to the tribes and what they're dealing with, whether it's gaming issues, healthcare, police, all of those things. When we elevate it, we want to make sure that we're speaking on behalf of Indian country and all of Indian country. And so in those instances where there isn't a consensus and there is some differences, we go to great lengths to try to make sure that we don't say something that isn't factually correct. And we want to make sure that we don't misrepresent anybody on that level, but really want to just bring to bear the strength and the unity of Indian country when we talk about whatever issue it might be. And when we talk about all of those things that you just brought up, that affects every part of the country. And sometimes it's just magnified when you have large land-based tribes and small police forces, and then we see the rampant use of drugs and all of those things that come with that, just because it doesn't have, it's not the funding isn't there to match the need, as historically has been the case, and we continue to have those issues. And so that's the advocacy that we want to make sure that the funding that is supposed to come to Indian country because of treaties, broken treaties, and stolen lands, those obligations are met with that trust responsibility, and making sure they deal with us on that government to government basis. And so, all of those things come together to bring the importance of making sure Indian country is really unified behind the organizations, so we can effectively advocate on their behalf.
Victor, I think President Sharp wanted to follow up on that. Please, President Sharp.
Yes, thank you. I really appreciate that question and bringing out law enforcement as an example. And I think to a lot of the points raised by Larry, at NCAI years ago, we at ATNI advanced a resolution calling for an update of the Quiet Crisis Report. And that was a report by the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights that detailed not one federal agency is living up to its trust responsibility on every metric, whether you're looking at law enforcement, healthcare, education. And so we took that resolution to NCAI in Atlanta, Georgia, and it passed there. And within 6 months, we had a bipartisan letter that was sent from Congress to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. They updated the report 2 years later and issued it back to Congress, called the Broken Promises Report. Senator Elizabeth Warren at last year's annual convention announced at General Assembly that she was going to introduce a bill to mirror that report, 5 different chapters, and to try to get to this longstanding chronic underfunding. And I think what happened during the pandemic, it revealed to the entire world just how vulnerable we are because of the failure of our trustee to fund things like basic healthcare. We had the highest rates of COVID, we had the highest death rates, and the highest infection rates. And so we have a lot of political leverage right now to continue to advance equity and parity in funding on these various metrics. It also intersects with IGA's taxation policy. And we made it very clear to members of Congress in shopping this piece of legislation that there is a, you know, this longstanding lack of funding and failed trust responsibility. And to the extent Congress chooses not to fully fund us, they need to get behind our vision for economic sovereignty, whether it's tax policy and supporting our exclusive right to tax within our borders, including tax parity and tax immunity. No government should be paying taxes. And so, as well as other economic policies, including international trade. So there's a major gap between where we are, where we need to be. To the extent they fail and choose to continue to not fund the trust as they should, then they need to get behind our vision for economic development. And so I wanted to raise that point because that's a great example of how NCAI, starting at a local level, going through a regional resolution. I still remember, and I want to make this last point, and it's one of the reasons I chose to run for NCI president. When I was president of ATNI and took that resolution to Atlanta, Georgia, that was kicked out. And I couldn't believe that the idea that we wanted to call on Congress to update this report was kicked out of committee. And I was told it was because it was a budget resolution, and budget resolutions are taken up at a different time. And so I'll never forget, I gathered with Amber Ebarb, who at the time was a policy person for NCI, and Jackie. It was midnight at a cafe downstairs in the lobby. And I understand there was like this major bar brawl that was happening at the same time. I still to this day don't know the details of all that happening, but there was a brouhaha across the lobby there. I was over in the cafe working on this resolution, and we said there's a lot of policy recommendations in that original report. We took every one of those, planted it in the new amended resolution, brought it back to General Assembly, it passed. And so that was an example where, as a tribal leader, I found a major barrier to try to get something through NCAI, something as basic as holding our trust responsible, you know, our trustee accountable. And so that's another area where NCAI is working to open up those avenues where you could go from grassroots directly through your tribe, your regional org, to NCAI, and we're responsive. And those are examples of things that NCAI can do. And so on the law enforcement issue, that's definitely an area we're highlighting. We met with tribes in Oklahoma. They want to consider a pilot, making that proposal to Senator Elizabeth Warren in this new bill. But those are some of the important things that we can do at NCAI, and we're successful when we do come together.
Awesome. At this time, if anyone's got any questions,
Yeah.
Or just
Also, yeah. Also,
go
I got a text from chairman. He's having trouble getting in. He's kind of got frustrated, and he's just
Okay.
like, you know, but yeah, questions, please.
Yeah, or even just comments that we'd like to that you'd like to have us address, or even if there's something going on in your area, please let us know about it. And I see one there from a reporter actually at the Arizona Republic. But before we lose folks, let me just say the goal of this task force again is we're going to develop some position papers on, you know, topics, whether it's policing, whether it's environmental, whether it's gaming, and we're going to develop these topics and vet them through tribal leaders, of course, and then make that a policy position. Let's be honest. I mean, the rest of this year is kind of shot in terms of if we want to really get some good legislation through, where we can remain hopeful through September when they've got to deal with the budget. But you know, the budget fights usually end the same way they've been ending for 10 plus years. Continuing resolution, top line budget doesn't change that much. There might be 1 or 2% cut due to the debt ceiling limit deal. But right now you've got Republicans fighting with Republicans in the House, and they can't even get stuff that they want through the House because they're holding it up because people are mad about the deal McCarthy cut. And so whatever we develop here is going to be carried into the election year, and we're going to leverage Indian voting like we never have before to get this addressed. Look, if you're a candidate and if you're not talking about tribal sovereignty, then you know we're going to encourage the tribes in that particular state. You really got to look at what's in your best interest, who can help you the most, who can stem this tide, this erosion of tribal sovereignty that we're seeing. And that's where a lot of our leverage is going to come into next year. So Did we have some questions, Victor, or?
We had Deb saying that she wants the white paper and stuff like that, and I
Oh,
think,
okay.
how this really relates to tribal gaming again is, you're starting to, what was different, 20 years ago when the tribe started expanding 25 years ago in a commercial gaming is that, we were dealing with land-based and we were dealing with land in a trust and stuff like that. And, we saw the industry change. And, but now you see with these sports betting companies are just very aggressive. I'd like to point out what just happened in Maine is that they, as an organization, the tribes in Maine were given exclusivity for online mobile sports betting, and the trade group, the Sports Betting Alliance, en masse boycotted going into Maine, and actually went back and tried to get them to change their the revenue participation, because they have it that the tribes get over 50% or 50%. And so you have this really aggressive trade group that is going after tribes, going after the tribal sovereignty. And, to see someone in an organization like IDEA, which have companies like Canby and Catania Media and other ones, and now they're, putting the commentary and, stepping outside of their wheelhouse to go after tribal sovereignty, when before they were supposed to be supporting online gaming and sports betting for the industry. Now they've taken a side and said, we're going to go after tribal sovereignty. And, when I spoke to Jonathan Michaels from Sightline, he was shocked that this happened. They didn't know they're part of this group. And yet here's this organization that is trying to supposedly speaking for everyone, yet going on the attack after the tribe. So a lot of shock for a lot of people. I think us in Indian country, we are not surprised by it. I think and what you're seeing here is they don't want the tribes to go online. They don't want the tribes to compete. They don't want the tribes to have online gaming. They want to control the future of gaming. And here's the most egregious part of all this. It isn't about what we're talking about at Brackeen and in the Supreme Court and the Indian Child Welfare Act is not to stop from stealing our land, to stop them from stealing our gaming, but to stop them from stealing our children. I mean, that is really the fundamental of what we're talking about here, which is the Indian Child Welfare Act was started to stop from stealing our children. I have adopted, and my son is going to be 8 years old, and he was in our tribe, and I adopted him, because of this, so our child was not sent to foster homes or anything. He stayed within the tribe. He's adopted. He's with his family. He's with his cousins. He's with his mom and his dad. And that's what it's supposed to be. So these guys are not going after game. They want to steal our children. That's why it's so egregious. And for them, it's like, oh, well, we take away gaming too. They don't need children. We don't need gaming if they don't have children. You know what I mean? So that's why it's so egregious. This is the type of fight that we are in, so don't let me get more animated on this, but it's true. And I just want to drive that point home. Deb Kroll has a question. Good morning, Deb. I heard a bit about preserving sacred places. What are the tribes doing to get those protections into federal law? As we know, executive orders can be reversed. Larry?
Yeah. I think that's one of the continuing things that we need to look at and make sure that we continue to stay active and pursue that for that very reason. We know EOs are relatively easier to get, but they're also harder to maintain, especially when you have that change in administrations. And so the only way to make sure that we stay consistent and protect those moving forward is through legislation. And I know we have a lot of advocates on many different levels that continue to advocate and push for that support. And sometimes that's harder to come by as Congress change, and especially in these times. But it's still part of the fight and the mission of NCAI to protect that sovereignty. And the sovereignty of our sacred places is key. And so that will continue to be a fight that we look at and make sure that we're doing everything we can to help advocate for that.
And it's only sacred until they find the minerals underneath it, from
Right.
what I can tell from both administrations. So this, and this is not a Republican or Democrat thing. This is, a sovereignty thing. So, we are fighting from both sides. You have Trump giveth, or excuse me, Biden giveth, Biden taken away. You know what I mean? You're looking at, Nevada and the lithium, and they're just like, oh, we want green energy. We're going to plow all this land under. And then, you're looking at Oak Flats in Arizona, which is the same thing. So to me, they're both the same issue. In my role in Pechanga.net, I follow all these issues, as we all know. So, but
Yeah,
that's where
and-
the threat's coming from,
And Victor, and we'll give the last word to President Sharp. But one of the best questions we got at NCAI at the task force was, how is this going to end? What is our end game here? And a couple of people summed it up really well. And it goes to Deborah's question in a sense. We know these executive orders are not law. They've been disregarded. Courts have disregarded them and just saying, that only applies to federal agencies. But Executive Order 13175 has endured 4 administrations, and we've used that a lot. And it has been instructive. It's been influential. Not even Donald Trump made a move to rescind it. So we think it's time for an upgrade and an update. And I think it only works if you really, because our electorate is so divided, razor thin margins, the last couple elections, and frankly, razor thin margins in a couple of states. And some of those states have 10-15% Indian population. So, and then even a state like Oklahoma, okay, overwhelmingly Republican, but Oklahoma used to have 2 or 3 Democrats at a time, and now they, I think they have none. And guess what?
They're all in California.
Yeah. But the tribes could sway an election. They did really well against this governor the last cycle. I think with more time, they could have rallied some more. But could Democrats use 1 or 2 more seats in the House right now? You best believe they could. And we're gonna leverage all that and hopefully get a new executive order from President Biden. And it's an executive order we want it more comprehensive than 13175, the current we want it to deal with all these issues that environmental. We want it to deal with jurisdictional issues, so that when some of these issues can be stopped at the agency level or even the state agency level, and they don't have to go to the Supreme Court where we typically get a negative ruling. And so that's the end game here. And we're just going to have to leverage tribal leader energy, Indian countries energy, and I think everybody knows what's going on around them. But something as simple as a wind farm, these offshore wind farms, and I'll turn it over to President Sharp, but we had no idea that in the debt ceiling limit deal, they're relaxing a bunch of the permitting so that they can go and find more of these natural resources for renewable energy. Okay, that's a good thing. Tribes are for that. Nobody's in favor of, we want to address climate change. Tribes have always been having to deal with climate change, and is particularly in this country. And so we could actually help them or explain to them. But instead, they're going to relax the permitting provisions, not even ask the Northwest or Northeast tribes, how is this going to impact your fishing, your whale hunting, all those things. And they're just, basically telling everyone, we're going to go do this. Oh, sorry, tribes, if it ruins your fisheries, and the fisheries are already in bad shape from climate change. So these things have got to be dealt with, at a much faster pace than some of these federal agencies are taking them on. And I get it. A lot of times they don't want to fight with the state. They don't want to fight with the state governor. And it's easier to just brush aside the tribes and get this done. But we just can't let this. We saw it happen with the oil boom, all throughout history, where you noted, Victor, they'll come for your resources. Well, we got to lay an international highways or a national highway system. Guess where it's going to go? It's not going to go through downtown Tulsa. It's not going to go through, it's not going to inconvenience anyone in the suburbs. The highway system primarily impacted Indian country and minority communities in big cities. So,
And that's the way it's always been. Jason, I just have one. Do you have any sense of optimism after the Supreme Court decision on the Voter Rights Act last week?
yeah, I mean, that was an unexpected victory where you saw Kavanaugh and Roberts go over and say, all right, this is so egregious, Alabama, you can't redistrict based on race. You just
So they couldn't fake it, huh?
yeah,
It was so
as much
egregious
as they want to,
couldn't.
yeah.
Oh.
And it's just weird. I mean, it does, but I get the sense that Roberts is just trying to prevent these new Trump justices from throwing everything, throwing the baby out with the bathwater, just overturning everything that the right wing has always wanted to overturn and get rid of. We'll see what affirmative action is going to be coming down too at some point. And
Well,
see how
one
this
of the
all-
things that concerns me is that I know several of them have adopted children. So,
Yeah, well-
they have skin in the game. Roberts, I know for sure. And
Right.
so, like I said, for us, this is a very fundamental,
Mhm.
our children. So this
know, but-
isn't land, water. This is our children, and this is what this is. And this is the move that they've decided to move on was
Right.
our children,
Yeah, they don't look at it as, familial as we do. I think Coney Barrett and they just think anybody should be able to, these kids are in need. We should be able to adopt them. And it shouldn't matter what their race is. If you want to adopt, yeah, in a perfect world, but you've got to look at what happened in Indian country. You were just ripping kids, from the womb for centuries. And
they're
that law,
still
that
sending
law
the
wasn't made up. That law was to address, again, historical wrongs.
they're still sending the bodies of these children that they took hundreds of years ago
Yeah.
home.
Right.
They're taking them from the Carlisle and all these boarding schools, and it's like we can go in deeper, and I think we've made our point that this is really
Right.
something that is at our heart, and that's why this task force has
Right.
been reactivated. And we've had success, and when we're united, we are very powerful.
Right.
And I think I have good hopes for this task force. And I think the most important, before we go, I think the most important question we need to ask is, how can the industry help us, Jason? How can, what message can we give to our readers and
I
our
think-
our viewers? I mean,
Obviously, our gaming industry can help provide resources, and if we're strong, but President Sharp can answer that better. How can Indian country pool its resources and make this happen? And if you want to close us out, President Sharp, we'd appreciate it.
Yes, yes, thank you. And I really appreciate that last question as well. On the sacred sites, I think that there's one thing that we can do that we've done in the past, and we've done it quite well, and that's direct political action. And just using Oak Flat as an example, we did a sovereignty run at NCAI 20 years ago. We ran from Quinault to the front steps of the United States Supreme Court, and Chairman Stevens participated with us. I think they covered all of Wisconsin in a single day. During that, it was the 1-year anniversary of 9/11. This year, we went to what we call ground zero of sovereignty attacks, and that was right there in Oklahoma. We ran across Oklahoma into New Mexico, Arizona, Southern California to open up NCI's annual convention in Sacramento. And since that time, I mean, we went right into Oak Flat. You could feel the thunder. It was a rolling, very powerful experience. At the end of that, we hiked into some of the most sacred places of Oak Flat. And then we just went on up into Cheyenne and Arapahoe. And those were areas where we know that we have a connection to our sacred sites. And so following that sovereignty run, we were invited back to Oak Flat following the White House conference. I took a red-eye flight from DC to participate in a symposium that Friday to close it out. We went to the Ninth Circuit in Pasadena to stand with the Apaches during the en banc rehearing. And so throughout this entire time, NCI has been directly engaged. And I think that's our call to action. every one of us has a role, and we want to create, as I said, multiple points of entry for our friends and allies to support us, whether it is in litigation and signing on to an amicus brief, whether it is taking our talking points to Capitol Hill, whether it is these webinars in which we want to share information, exchange information, or calls to action for direct political action, because I'm quite certain and positive that what's on the horizon is going to require a full court press. It's going to require everything. And I also want to open up an invitation. You've probably heard me talk about the brain trust of Indian country. I don't believe that the power of NCI lies in a DC-centric nonprofit organization. It's our ability to unleash the entire brain trust of Indian country, whether that is a tribal technician that's working inside a single tribe that happens to be the national subject matter expert, or our regional organizations, the powerhouse of USET and AT&I, when we were able to come together through our MOU and agreement, or even just some of our youth organizations. If you look at the next generation of our young leaders coming up, they're very powerful and they have a lot to say. And NCAI has platformed our youth commission by having a State of Indian Nations address, by giving them time at general assemblies. And so I just want to say it's going to take all of us. We're going to create multiple points of entry at every level, and it's a full court press, because what NCAI has been doing since 1944 is defending tribal sovereignty, and we're going to continue to do that. And now with our friends and allies, and I should say family at IGA. And so, Siakula, again, I thank you for the invitation and the important topics that we're going to be covering. And please know, no matter when, where, 24/7, if you have a call to action, I'll respond and be part of this. So again, thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Larry, for coming today. Thank you for your kind words.
And thank you to all the viewers. We'll be back next week, I promise. I apologize about last week. We had a last minute rug pull. We apologize. So Executive Director Larry Wright Jr., thank you very much for joining us. President Fawn Sharp from the National Congress of Americans, and everyone, we'll see you next week. Thanks so much for staying with us. We really appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Take care.